Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to understand the great wisdom of this magnificent scripture, that the power of Krishna, that the words of the Gita, the example of Arjuna, the wisdom of Master and Swamiji, all of these many forces will come together in our hearts and minds and lift us out of our delusions and into thy light. Om. Peace. Amen. I do want to make an announcement before we start. I'm starting day after tomorrow on a series of trips that will take me till mostly out of town till December 1st. Then we have Christmas. Then may travel again. All of which is that this is the last Tuesday night webinar on the Gita for now, but they will reappear again. Exactly how you'll know they're reappearing, I'm not entirely certain, but we'll figure out a way. But sometime, probably not in December, but sometime in the new year, we'll start up again because we're only halfway through the book, and I'm going to finish. Just depends when and where and how long. So I wanted you to know that.
asleep, Lord, will you wake me from this dream, Lord, will you wake me? In thee I dive, in thee I rise, in thee I dive, in thee I rise, in thy
Okay. So, we are on chapter 7. We are on verse 12. We are in class 82. So, to finish this book, will probably be 150. Something like that. Okay. Chapter 7, verse 12. Know that all manifestations of sattva, the elevating, rajas, the activating, and tamas, the darkening quality, emanate from me. They exist in me, though I am not apparent in them. This is the great mystery that God is behind everything and we don't see him. There we have it. It's a very interesting, I've noticed in spiritual life over many years, that when one finds oneself in little vortices of thought, every so often there's just little ideas that circle around, and you sort of concentrate on a few ideas for a little while, and then you move on to something else. Because the path is so rich, you can do that for a very, very long time. So first let's talk about what the 3 gunas are. You may already know, but in case you don't, it helps. There's a few. The gunas are not one, I have to say for myself, that I always think about. There's certain, but it's one of those classic ways of understanding creation that are very helpful to have clear in your mind. When I say I don't think about it, it's not that I don't know it or ever refer to it. I tend to think of karma, reincarnation, and the chakras. Tends to be sort of the little triumvirate that I work with, and the yugas, to understand the external world. The yugas are the rising and falling ages of the planet, states of consciousness. But creation itself, the energy of creation, is made up of these 3 forces that interplay with each other, and they're called the gunas. I'm not quite sure what the translation of the word gunas is, unless it just is simply this. Like vritti means vortex, but and these 3 qualities within us are always interplaying. And actually I do think about this, but not as vividly. Maybe I'll start doing it more. There's always a force that is contractive and trying to pull the energy, sort of down into the material world. It doesn't necessarily, it can mean that we're going into lower energy, but it can also just mean that we're going into darker energy, because tamasic energy is not always low energy. Sometimes tamasic energy can have a lot of force, but it's in combination with. So tamasic energy is downward pulling. Sattvic energy is upward pulling. And upward means expanding into a broader and broader self-definition, which by definition takes us away from the material world into the spiritual world. Tamasic energy by definition takes us into matter as the only reality. I am a separate entity in creation. I am not part of a greater reality, and the more I can emphasize my own importance, my own desires, my own power, my own satisfaction, then the happier I will be. Sattvic energy says, I am part of a greater reality. The more I can emphasize my unity with all of creation, the more joyful and happy and free I will be. So you have, on both ends, you have tamasic and you have rajasic. And then in the middle, sattvic, rajasic. I keep saying it wrong. Sattvic, tamasic. Those are the opposite extremes. Expansive, contractive. Then you have rajasic, which is just activating. So rajasic energy is actually somewhat neutral. And sometimes we express what you would call purely rajasic energy. Puppies express a lot of purely rajasic energy. They just run, they just do things. Children sometimes just do things. And very restless people just do things. They're not really going forward, they're not really going back. I had I have known several people this way, but one in particular that I knew, she just liked to talk. She was not a close friend, but she was someone who occasionally came into my orbit, and she just liked to talk. She just talked all the time about anything. And so it wasn't actually darkening, and it wasn't really uplifting. It was just endlessly noisy. It just went on and 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 on. But often, when we have activating energy, it's either activating energy that actively goes tamasic or actively goes sattvic. So mostly we have raja sattvic, raja tamasic. And if you actually look at life, it's very interesting, because you'll see that qualities just divide up. Like a couple of days ago, I have a very sensitive nervous system where a lot of what people call music, a lot of very popular music nowadays just grates on my nerves, something really tremendous. The hard beat, the shouting lyric, the lack of melody, the sheer volume of it. And I was going to a live performance of something totally different, but it was an art and wine festival in our local area, and as part of it in the piazza, the area in front of where the theater was, they had a band. I never actually looked at it. It was very, 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 very loud, just ear-splittingly loud, and without melody, without any redeeming qualities as far as I can see, despite the fact that there were probably several hundred people there who were totally enjoying it. I try not to be too much of a curmudgeon, but somehow it was a really hard moment. And I just walked into this energy, and it was very, very, very rajasic, but it was rajasic pulling us down into tamas, pulling us down into sensuality, pulling us down into ego, pulling us down into, as Swami said, the very volume and the nature of it, sort of tells you I don't have to relate to anybody else. I can just do what I want to do. And the incredible way they imposed it on everyone for vast distances around, that in itself is tamasic. I like it, I want it, you must like it, you must want it. And sattvic could be extremely dynamic, but it would be lifting you up, going into a Bach concert, or it doesn't have to be old-fashioned, it doesn't have to be from the past. It can be, but it can be very uplifting, and by its very nature, it would make everything different. Now, what the Gita is saying, that the divine energy in itself is simply energy. And we receive it as the divine energy. We receive it as the light force. We have the light force within us, and it all comes to us from the divine. We live by the grace of God. We were manifested by the grace of God. It's all that cosmic life energy. But then it comes into it comes under the sway of our willpower. It comes under the influence of our vibration. And then we take that energy and we use it one way or another. A very interesting statement that Swami has made at different times is, the only difference between the worst criminal and the greatest saint is the way they behave. And the way they perceive reality, and therefore the way they behave, what they think of as true, what they think of as a happiness producing. But the point of that is that the worst criminal can have a sudden revelation, and the next morning can become a very saintly person. I mean, in potential, because he has within him all the elements that the saint has. He's just taking the energy and turning it in a different direction. When I've been talking about the chakras in another class that I was giving. The sixth chakra is the spiritual eye and the medulla. It's the positive. The spiritual eye is the positive because sattvic and expansive pole of the sixth chakra. The medulla, which is the seat of individuality identified with limiting conditions. This is individuality identified with the infinite. And it's the same chakra. It's the chakra in which our individuality comes to a focus. And either we take that individuality and we use it to affirm our separateness, or we take that individuality and we use it to affirm our unity with all creatures. Either we steal from others, we give to others. You have power over others for our own aggrandizement, we serve others with a generous heart. And in every instance, we're just choosing which aspect of my own potential am I going to be part of. And at all times, God is equally present. And at all times, that energy can move us upward or it can move us downward. And we have to have individuality we have to be aware of our individuality to be incarnated on this planet at all. And we have to have a material body to be incarnated in a material world. So these are the given. It's not like if we don't have those things, then we're in the astral or the causal world. We're not in the material world. But so the individuality, the operating the one body, the knowing our own name, to be able to function in this world. But so it's just a question of which way we are looking. You can actually say it like that. Our individuality rests at the medulla, and we either direct it upward through the spiritual eye into sattvic energy, drawing the activating force to make us sattvic, or we constantly look, our perspective is how can I affirm my own limited reality. When I was 19 years old, 18 in fact, and I read Swami Vivekananda's book. It was the Four Yogas, and that was the beginning of my spiritual journey. And my recollection is that he had several suggestions in that book, which I've always remembered. Or maybe I'm going to see if I could still remember all of them. But the most important one for this discussion is, don't think about yourself, and you'll be happy. Now, it was very interesting to me. I was not selfish as a person. I've always been gifted with a somewhat generous and enthusiastic nature. But I was always self-concerned, which is slightly different, which is just always calculating my own position. And not calculating it necessarily in a selfish way, but just always concerned about how I felt, what I was doing, whether I was being good enough. Mostly it was that. Was I doing self-doubt? Self-doubt made me self-concerned. That would be how I would put it. And also I was in my late teens. And children and teenagers tend to be very concerned about themselves because their world is small. They're just growing up. But I remember just how intrigued I was by that idea, and honestly thinking, what else is there to think about? How would I actually live otherwise? So I understand this, just sitting at the ego and looking at your individuality. And even when I met Swamiji and moved to Ananda, by then I was 24, I continued, the only way I can think to put it is I was always calculating my own advantage, but not selfishly. It's just that I like to have fun. I like to do the thing that was the most interesting to me. I like to be involved in lots of things. I have a very Gemini nature, and I like to be involved in lots of things. So if I was starting out to do one thing and got interested in something else, I would just flow with that. I had a very limited sense of commitment, I think is the best way I could put it. It's just, and I still have that. I still struggle against the inclination. Swamiji says to develop concentration, you should do one thing at a time and bring it to completion before you start something else. But I tend to be doing at least several things at the same time. That's just, and I fight against it, but that's how I am. But I remember at Ananda Village, I would always calculate my own advantage. And my best friend and my mentor for my first decade there, I was very blessed to have as my best friend and my mentor, Seva, who was one of the founding members of Ananda. She died about 6 months ago at the age of 86, lived a glorious life, and came in from doing some serviceful work. Her heart stopped and she died. Couldn't have been more just beautiful and simple than that, which would be the way she would have liked it. She did like it. But Seva was very disciplined and very regular. She was a bit older than I was, and she was just one of the mainstays of the founding of Ananda. And I worked with her in the publications building in the office. And we used to have to walk over the hill from Ayodhya to get to work. It was like a mile through the woods there. We didn't have a car, so we always just walked. And one day I came over the hill, and I do not remember the sequence, but we usually tried to get to work at 9. I came over the hill, I separated from Seva and went to do something else. By the time I got to the office, it was 4 in the afternoon. And it wasn't like I wasn't busy. It wasn't like I just went and sat under a tree and read a book or something like that. I was engaged in one little thing after another, but I just kept letting myself be charmed by something else. I was always thinking about what I would enjoy the most, and so I did it. And I remember Seva, she was a woman of few words, interestingly. She was my best friend, and words were not her main means of communication, even though she could speak when she wanted to. All she said to me when I arrived was, "Good morning," 4 in the afternoon. But I thought at that time of Vivekananda's statement, because instead of saying my commitment is to go to work, I should just go there, I need to be in the office at 9. I thought, oh, this looks like fun, and that looks like fun, and this looks like fun, and that looks like fun. And fun to me was doing something helpful. It wasn't, as I said, just dissipating my energy. But I came to understand, and actually I learned from Seva, I learned from her to keep my word. If I was committed, I would do it. And I stopped calculating my own advantage. Didn't matter if I preferred to do that. This is what I said I would do. And it became a joke. I said if Babaji appeared and was giving a satsang at the meditation retreat at Ananda Village, and Seva and I had agreed to go to town and do our laundry, I would go to town and do my laundry with Seva, because that was what I had to learn. And when I actually started, when I moved in 1971 to Ananda Village, and within a couple of months I had responsibility for the kitchen at the meditation retreat, which not only fed the guests, because we didn't have any other retreat, but also many of the residents had their homes there. Many of the residents lived there in shacks and teepees and trailers, and very small, and so almost all of them ate their meals also in the dining room. And I had a little bit of help, but I was pretty almost single-handed, cooking for about 30 people, 3 times a day, 6 days a week. Lots of energy. I was young and strong. And I was so busy, just so busy from breakfast to dinner, that I just never had time to think about myself. And that was also when I really began to understand exactly what Vivekananda meant. I was always thinking about what everybody else needed, what they wanted to eat, how I could provide it for them, having to go shopping to get the supplies, helping people run errands, doing their errands in town, doing everybody's laundry. There was just no time for me to stop and think, what about me? And whereas I didn't understand it theoretically, once I was just in that reality where the Rajasic energy was going sattvic, I was always using my activating energy to participate in the realization that I was part of a greater reality. I was part of, as it were, literally, of a community of people, many of whom depended on me for the most fundamental function, which is to provide food for them. And as you know, you begin to understand. And so a lot of times also when we talk about this, one realizes that one has to fight against the rajasic impulse. And later in this book, maybe it's coming up quite soon, I'm not quite sure how much later, Swamiji talks about one of the definitions of a God-realized master is triguna rahitam, which means master of the three gunas, meaning that he's not influenced by the opposites, by the ever-changing quality. His energy doesn't have to be activated in a material way. My sattvic energy was sattvic, but it was rajasic sattvic. Because what kept it sattvic was that I was always busy, like this. And then what would make it tamasic would be when I would get stressed, when I would get crabby, when I would become self-important, when I would be disappointed if people didn't like my food, whatever it might be. And then my activated energy would fall into tamasic energy. The other way tamasic energy develops is quite simply just laziness, just sheer, I don't want to put out energy. You meet people who are just tamasic. They just don't want to do anything. A woman friend of mine, actually, this was very paradoxical. I've mentioned her in several contexts before. She was a natural beauty, extraordinary, had just a slender, elegant physical body, a beautiful face, extraordinary, blue eyes, perfect eyebrows, long dark hair. She was just gorgeous, and she was naturally gorgeous. It wasn't personality, although she was a lovely person. It was just the way her physical body was made. So from a very young age, she was beautiful. And she herself said, when she learned the word tamasic, she said it made her exceedingly tamasic because everybody doted on her from when she was very little. She never had to do anything to garner attention or garner appreciation or praise. She just had to show up in her body, which is what she was doing most of the time. But she herself said she just became just as lazy as could because she would just sit there and the world would hover around her. Fortunately, she married a very refined person who appreciated that she was beautiful, but did not consider her beauty to be her main asset. He liked her heart and her nature. And so she actually, somehow she changed. She had that same body, but she changed herself because she knew she had to break the cycle. So she cut her hair badly. She didn't use makeup. She got a pair of very unflattering glasses. She started wearing clothes that just looked dowdy on her, just because she needed to break it. She needed to break that habit, and she did. And became very productive in ways not dependent on what she looked like. The ultimate form of sattvic is not rajasic sattvic, but just pure and free. But even the masters transcend all the oscillations of this material world. So, he says, 7:12, know that all manifestations of sattva, the elevating quality, rajas, the activating quality, and tamas, the darkening quality, which is a nice way to put it, darkening as opposed to the light, because the light is the manifestation of Om that we're going toward, and tamas darkens it. It darkens the light within us. It darkens the light in the world. You know, the tamasic energy brings shadow, blocks the light. They all emanate from me. They exist in me, though I am not apparent in them. Now, then Master goes on to talk a lot. Nowadays, you don't see what Master used as an image, which was such a perfect image when I was a child. And you would go to the movies, you would sit in the theater and you would look back up and there was a projection booth, and the movie camera would come through. There would be the movie itself would be on film, and the film would be fed into the camera, and the film would move very quickly on little sprockets past the light beam, and the light beam would project it out onto the screen. I mean, you still see that to a certain extent, but you don't see the film going in front of it. But sometimes you do see the light beam projecting the image. Now, because of the way we use computers and so on, it doesn't look quite the same, but you used to be able to sit in the theater, become completely absorbed in the film in front of you, and then if you turn backwards, you would see the projection booth up there. You would see the horn of the camera, and you could literally watch. You could watch the light beam, and then the light beam would turn into all of this world that would be in front of you. All these people, all these adventures, these places, all of these things seem to be in the room with you. They seem to be active. They were happening right there, but they actually emanated from the light beam. And every so often, very rarely, but every so often, for some reason the film would catch fire. I guess the light would get too hot for it. And you'd be watching the movie and you'd just be lost in the movie. And suddenly it would just melt in front of your eyes. All the images would just go away. And then the whole thing would stop and the projections would have to sort of pull past the frames that had been melted and then just pick up the movie in another spot. Again, it didn't happen often, but it would just suddenly like break the illusion. I know psychedelic drugs break the illusion of this world. Sometimes if you take a hallucinogenic, you're looking at what appears to be the solid part of the world, and it suddenly just breaks apart into little flashes of light. This is why many individuals of my tribe became very involved in the spiritual path after psychedelic experience, because you would read about everything as just a manifestation of light, but it doesn't look like that. But because of the effect of that chemical in your brain, for some reason, sometimes it would just turn into light. I personally had that experience. I never got very far into drugs, but I did have that experience one time. It just pixelated. And I knew then at that point, it was so profound. It wasn't spiritually profound in itself, but it had a profound impact on my understanding. Because then I would read that it's just a manifestation of light. And in that chemically induced, not spiritually earned, but chemically induced moment, I had watched it happen. I had watched everything just turn into light, and it was perfectly obvious. That's all that was happening. So this is how Master tries to get us to understand how God can be all of these things at the same time, because the beam of light divides up and just becomes all these different forces. Another way that Swami often talks about it is the waves on the ocean. And the closer you are to the ocean, the more sattvic you are, paradoxically. The more sattvic you are because you're close to the shared reality, the more your wave separates itself out. The rajasic energy pulls it up, but the more separate it becomes is actually the more tamasic it becomes, because it's trying to make itself taller than all the others and claiming this unique and special power that it has. Look at me, I'm such a big wave. But all it ever is a manifestation of the ocean. It seems to have its own reality, but it's all just the seawater appearing in all these different forms. And then Master writes, Swamiji writes for Master's thoughts here, that also that God therefore is that the divine therefore manifests both as the saint and as the villain, that he plays all the parts, because it's all just the life force taken under the command of egoic free will, and then manifested as we choose to manifest it, so that we can learn where happiness comes from and what causes suffering. Swami tries to explain, because it's so confusing. We all ask, how can a loving God create suffering and allow people to act out their darkening tendencies. There's just such a sweet story here. Charles Dickens was, of course, a great novelist, and one of the books he wrote was The Old Curiosity Shop. And there's a character in it. I don't know if I ever read this book, but I've always known about the plot. There was a very sweet character in the story, and her name was Little Nell. It was the child, Little Nell. And when you're creating from a level of divine inspiration, whatever manifested form you're following, whether even it's cooking or painting or writing a novel, if you are powerful in your capacity to draw inspiration, as Charles Dickens was, oddly enough, you're not actually in control of it. It just simply exists, and you have to follow its guidelines. And they say in this story that when Charles Dickens realized that the plot of the book he was writing demanded that this much loved little Nell was going to have to die, it's said that he walked around the streets of London weeping for many hours, because he just felt it was such a pain in his heart that he was going to have to be the instrument of little Nell's death in this story. And Swami tries to help us to understand that when God sees, when Divine Mother sees, it's better to think of it as Divine Mother in this way, that the inevitable result of the course of action that we have embraced is going to bring us suffering. She suffers with us. Master wrote a poem that said, "When I am only a dream," and he said, "And no loud or whispered prayer will manifest me physically, because my physical body is gone." He said, I will, when you suffer, I will weep through my eyes. And then it says, and I will weep through your eyes. When I see you suffer, the tears that come through your eyes are the tears of the sympathy of the divine. The divine is not heartless, but, well, just like a mother or a father who really loves their child. They will not let that child, they won't ruin that child's character by not appropriately reflecting back to the child what right behavior is and what the consequences are of wrong behavior. I had, again, this was an acquaintance, not a friend, but she didn't like to hear her children cry. I mean, no feeling person would want their children to cry. But she would do anything to keep her children from crying. And of course, her children pretty quickly figured out that they could get anything they wanted from their mother, or get away with anything, if they just cried a little bit, because she would always give in. And they were, as a consequence, the mother totally crippled her children emotionally. They had no strength of character and no will at all. This is not love. So we want Divine Mother to reward us when we're naughty, and allow us to not use our God-given willpower and talent, but just, have everything handed to us. But Divine Mother loves us too much. She won't do that. So all the temptations are there, all the possibilities of darkening energy are right there. But we have to gain the mastery to choose the light. And anyone who's raised or educated children understands that if you don't behave appropriately, then it's not true love. That's why we often talk about Heavenly Father and Divine Mother, so that we can see ourselves in right relationship, that we can understand that we are children being raised We are children being educated. We are children being taught what it is to grow up and become a fine human being. And when the plot becomes tragic, God suffers with us. But he doesn't suffer. His suffering, Divine Mother's suffering, is mitigated by the fact that she knows that this necessary lesson will result in great happiness for us. This is a wonderful suggestion that Swami Kriyananda made as a way to be able to cope with other people's suffering. He said whenever he sees people really suffering, he always thinks, oh, how much sweeter then will be the day when that suffering ends in the bliss of God. Because having tasted the depths, then how much more profoundly we will appreciate when the divine descends. And also we go very low and very dark so that we will understand what the nature of life without God is. Because our human griefs, your love alone can mend. That's what we say in the festival every week. Okay, my friends, let's see. There's a part here that I may just deal with for a moment. The question is, why does God allow suffering? Swamiji gives us three very interesting points. The first one he says is, sometimes a small child, if it's the mother or the father, has to leave and go to work, the child gets very upset. Why can't you stay here with me? Why don't you stay home with me? So the child feels like it's being made to suffer because the parent doesn't stay home with it all the time. But it doesn't understand that it's a necessary part of life, that the parent take care of other things so that the child himself can live. So he says he just doesn't have the point of view. So sometimes our belief that God is doing the wrong thing is just because we're not mature enough to understand what the real context is. The other is that God made creation so that he might enjoy himself through many. Swami says that God doesn't seem to enjoy himself through very many. But this is where the teachings of the masters and the saints is so important. This is the difference between mere philosophers and men and women of realization. When I went to college, I went to Stanford University, primarily just because I got in. It wasn't as hard to get in those days, and they would interview you personally. And so I talked my way in. That's how I got in. And I was very glad to go there because I was desperately seeking for something that I could believe in. And I held out the hope that at such a well-regarded university, I would find people who could really teach me what I wanted to know. I didn't know yet what it was that I wanted. I didn't find the path of self-realization until after that first year of college. But what I discovered there was, I discovered intelligence, and I discovered knowledge, but I did not discover wisdom. And in fact, immediately I took a class which is called consciousness, because it was 1966, so 65 in fact, so what do? Consciousness is what was happening. And I was just appalled that we were never actually going to come to any conclusions. We were just going to randomly explore what everyone thought. And we were going to accumulate knowledge about everybody's point of view. And I was looking for some kind of certainty. And this was what, this is where the saints and the masters come, that we say, with all our knowledge that we've accumulated and all our intellect, that there's something wrong and it isn't what's supposed to be happening. And the masters, who've had a revelation about the true nature of consciousness and of reality, say, there's nothing wrong. It's all happening as it's meant to happen. It's the only way it could happen. And the end of all of it is perfect freedom and bliss. And it's like, who has the right to speak? The professor or the saint? Now, in the world of the university, the professor speaks. But I quickly, within about 2 weeks, became completely disillusioned with the world of the university. And fortunately, soon after, I discovered the world of the saints. You see, it's a whole, just different criteria. We can collect all this knowledge and compare it to itself and do all kinds of interesting things. But direct revelation is something completely else. And this is where the masters all say it was worth it. In my own book, the little book that I wrote called Ask Asha, which is, I like that book. I think it's very good. Nobody buys it, nobody knows about it. But it's a good book if you're ever bored and have nothing to do. And because it's Swami's teaching. And may find the thought, yes. One of the questions, I actually created that book. The website I had at that time was more interactive, and people sent me many questions, and I would answer those questions. And I created that feature for the sake of eventually making this book. And one of the questions I was asked was the obvious one: why does God allow suffering? And I drew some just sort of like images as a way to think about this. And I had several different pictures. One is, let's say that a friend of mine terribly misunderstands something that I've done, and that my intention, my motive, and my action had one intention, but for some reason or another my friend totally misreads it, feels that I've broken the friendship, that I can't be trusted, whatever the misunderstanding might be. Maybe the information was misreported, maybe a critical email was lost in cyberspace. Whatever the cause, they're upset, and the subsequent pain that they go through is absolutely causeless. It's totally a misunderstanding. And then it happens that somehow or another the misunderstanding's cleared up, the suffering has been endured, but my friend realizes that it was completely causeless, that it was just the way they interpreted what happened. It was not actually what happened. Or another example of such a thing is you're walking in the forest and you see something on the ground and you believe it's a poisonous snake. And you become very excited and you change all your plans and you run away. And then gradually you realize it was never a poisonous snake. It was just a piece of wood on the ground that looked like a snake. There was never any danger. There was never any potential harm. It was just, again, the way I interpreted it. And this is how the masters describe that we live, and we live for many incarnations, with a completely false idea of what the rules of this world are, meaning where does happiness come from and what actually causes suffering. We keep doing things that we think are going to bring us happiness, that in fact bring us suffering. Then we suffer. And then as we gradually, through many incarnations, begin to realize that nobody was betraying us, there was no poisonous snake in the forest, we just perceived that that's the way things were. And this is what happens when we come into a state of realization. This is what the saints are saying. it was never what you thought it was. Now, I did suffer, but did the non-existent betrayal actually cause me to suffer? Or it was just a tremendous misunderstanding from the start. I thought I was alone. I thought I was unloved. I thought there was no divine taking care of me. I thought there was no purpose. But none of that was ever true. So I created a false reality. I suffered in that false reality. Is that God's fault? Is that anyone's fault at all? Did it even happen? My friend misunderstood me, suffered from the betrayal, then discovered that I'd never betrayed them. So was there a betrayal? These are just like the light beam coming down. These are just ideas that the human mind can grasp, that we begin to, and this is how we work with it. We apply it like a template. We try to, this is what happened when I first learned about reincarnation. I was a Jewish girl who grew up in Texas. It's like a couple of years in California before I found these teachings, which, was a more enlightened environment than where I had grown up. But I had no context. I recognized it intuitively. But it was just like, it became a working hypothesis. If reincarnation is true, if karma is true, how would everything look to me? It's still a very challenging hypothesis because of the concept of punishment and things like that. But nonetheless, there it is. And what I did was, for many years, I just tried it out. I just sort of tried it on. What if this were true? Until after a while, I began to see that it made everything make so much more sense. That nobody had to persuade me. It was finally wisdom. Finally, I wasn't just being handed knowledge, I was being handed wisdom. And I had the intuition to know it. Now, let's go on to chapter 7, verse 13. So, deluded by the three qualities, we're back to the gunas, deluded by the three qualities of nature, mortal beings do not perceive me with a capital Me, the infinite spirit, ever changeless and beyond all qualities. Well, the ever changeless, the one thing that happens to us in life that just is the most remarkable thing is how everything seems to change all the time. But the enduring reality is our sense of awareness of our distinct, continuous individuality. So that's the clue that's in there. Michael Singer, who's written a couple of very interesting books. I think he has a third one out now. He's actually a student of Paramahansa Yogananda. He doesn't keep that a secret. And he practices Kriya, and he's a very good man. I've met him only once, decades ago. But even at that time, you could feel he had a wonderful quality to it. And his book is called, Untethered Soul, I believe, and the Surrender Experiment. Then there's a third one. I'm not I don't study his teachings deeply because they come from the teachings I already practice. But I've read his books enough to appreciate how brilliantly he's articulated it and how marvelously he's translated it from the esoteric to the practical. And one of the wonderful things he talks about is the fact that there's always a voice going on in our head, that there's always somebody inside of us who is perceiving and, generally speaking, commenting on what's going on. And those are what we call our thoughts. We think this is true, we think that's true, we're afraid of this, we're worried about this, we're having conversations with people who aren't there, we're trying to, just make things happen. But what Michael points out, which is so delightful, he says there's always this voice talking, but there's always someone listening too. And he just raises the obvious question, which one is you? We tend to think that the voice that is talking is who I am. But he just raises the very real and interesting question, or assertion, that the actual real one is the one who's always listening. That's the enduring reality. And it's such an interesting little twist. Because whereas we tend to define ourselves by all those oscillating thoughts and feelings, the listener, who is equally present and is equally consistently me, is just watching it as a passing show. And he's taking the movie concept, the divine manifesting as these gunas, as the expansive and the contractive and the activating, that there's this other reality, this unchanging awareness. This is what Satchidananda is, ever existing and then ever conscious. See, that's what the listener is. The listener is ever conscious. And then the last part of Satchidananda is ever new joy. Existence, consciousness, bliss. That's actually a definition of the divine. The me that is always present is existence. Even the body comes and the body dies. But when the body dies, we discover that I do not die. And this was what the masters always asserted. Now, because of all this advanced medical technology, we have just countless TED Talks and best-selling books about people who talk about just stepping out of the body, and so interestingly, stepping out of the mind, and stepping out of this endless commentary and all these thoughts to a state of Satchidananda, where I am still there. I, the jiva, am still there. And I'm living, I'm aware, and then many describe. And I'm joyously happy. You know, from the human side, someone is hurt in an accident, someone's heart stops, they die. We consider it to be such a loss. But often, and often enough, and this is what the saints all tell us, the consciousness just continues. Swami put it to me so simply. He said, nothing happens when you die. Yes, your body changes, your plane of consciousness shifts, you move from the material to the astral world, but that which I call myself, the one who's always observing, and not all the thoughts that are going. One of the fascinating, medical mystery books, I can't remember the name of the author right now, but the woman was a researchist. She did research on the brain, and she had a stroke. And she had a stroke in such a way that her entire rational side, the left side of her brain, just broke. But her awareness was not broken. It's just that she was aware in such a completely different way than she was when she was functioning with all of the executive functions of the other half of her brain. And so she herself, even as she was going through the stroke and couldn't remember how to use the telephone, didn't even know what a telephone was, didn't know how to relate to any of the things that the executive part of her brain just did so naturally. And she was still conscious enough to be fascinated by what she was seeing and learning. Totally changed her perspective on anything. Prior to that time, she thought that the thoughts were the everlasting part of herself. And she realized that they were just the ephemeral part of herself. And the everlasting part of herself was just existence, consciousness, bliss. Just like that. Now, this is very, very practical. And this is what Michael does so brilliantly. I think he uses the word, I'm not sure, but he says to consider the one who always has the thoughts as your roommate. And your roommate doesn't have a job, so your roommate is always home. Wherever you are, that's where your roommate is. But you may be interested in your roommate. You may even like your roommate. You may like to spend a lot of time with your roommate. But you never make the mistake of thinking that your roommate and yourself are the same entity. And you always can hold yourself just a little bit back. Well, that's just your opinion. And this is what the whole process of meditation begins to teach us, because what we do when we're meditating is we calm the heart. The restlessness of the mind is actually related to a restless heart. This is something that Swami offers. He said we always talk about calming the mind in meditation, but the mind responds to the feelings in the heart. If you pay attention even for a moment, you'll see that that's true. If we're feeling anxious, if we're concerned about something, if we're eager to have something happen, it always starts with some compelling feeling, and then that feeling starts dictating what the mind is doing. If the heart becomes calm, or the heart becomes one-pointed in its focus upward, and this is where deep meditation depends on devotion. This is why whenever Keshav is available, I always want him just to sit and chant with us for just a little while, because he just brings it right out of his heart. And at least for me, when I sit next to him when he's chanting, I begin to everything just goes very still. It goes very still because the words of the song and the melody and the feeling that he himself puts into it is just like, I don't need anything else. I'm not reaching for anything else. And so the heart comes to rest. It just rests. Our hearts are restless, St. Augustine said, until they find their rest in thee. And that's what we're looking for. And this is why in the Gita here it says, we get confused by the three qualities and we don't perceive the divine, which is ever changeless in this ever-changing world. And once we discover that changeless stillness within us, whatever brings it to us, whether it's the memory of chanting, the memory of meditation, the moment out in nature when everything just goes still, or at any point in our life, whatever causes it, we discover in the midst of all of this that changeless reality of the divine is always present. And once the heart meets that, then everything becomes different. All right, my friends, that will be our evening. And now we will have a hiatus of at least several months before we pick up exactly where we left off and finish the commentary. God bless you.